You wake up before the sun, but not before the dust. It hangs in the air, this soft shimmer of crushed stone and paper fiber, swirling gently around your ankles as you sit up on your straw mattress. The monastery is quiet. Of course it is. It's been quiet for 300 years. Silence is less a rule here and more of a personality. You rise, stretch, and breathe in the familiar scent of ink. Not the sleek plastic tang of ballpoint pens, but the older, deeper aroma of soot, iron, and resin. Earthy, smoky, slightly metallic, like someone whispered into a forge. You are a Byzantine ink mixer, not a scribe, not an illuminator. You're the one who prepares the ink, the sacred sludge, the liquid history. It is a profession with very little applause and quite a lot of stirring. You probably won't make it through this day. Not because anything dramatic happens, of course.
No Viking raids. No imperial edicts.
Just the sheer, unhurried rhythm of Byzantine monastic life. A recipe so gentle, it could put even the most caffeinated soul to sleep. Before we begin, you're kindly encouraged to like and subscribe if your eyes are still open and your heart is now 3 degrees softer than it was before. And if you'd like to drop your location and local time in the comments, we'd love to know where in the world you're dreaming from. Now let's ease into tonight's journey. You make your way down the cloister corridor, sandals whispering across the stone floor. The sky outside is just starting to pale, like someone smudging charcoal across linen. A rooster crow echoes from the village below, but up here on the hillside, it's more of a polite suggestion than an alarm. You enter the scriptorium through a narrow wooden door that always sticks, no matter how many times you fix the hinge. Inside, the room is dim but not dark. A few oil lamps flicker on shelves carved into the stone wall. Scrolls rest in nooks. Reed pens lie scattered across a desk like tired soldiers after a long campaign. Your tools await. A mortar, a pestle, 2 jars of powdered soot, a coil of dried gallnuts, and a suspiciously sticky lump of tree resin you've been meaning to replace for weeks. The major fact: Byzantine ink wasn't just one substance. It was a precise and sacred blend, often made with oak galls soaked in wine, mixed with iron salts, then thickened with gum arabic. The recipe was as closely guarded as a royal secret, though admittedly less interesting at parties. You begin, as always, with the soaking. Gallnuts into the wine. The wine hisses faintly as it accepts the tannins. It will sit like that for hours, possibly days. This is a life of marinating, not rushing. Outside, a fellow monk begins chanting the early office. The notes trickle through the scriptorium window like fog. You hum along badly. Here's your obscure tidbit. Some ink mixers believed that singing psalms while stirring the mixture improved its spiritual quality. Whether the ink actually turned out darker, or the monks simply felt better, remains unresolved. Scholars still debate whether it was superstition, science, or just a way to make the day go faster. You don't mind. You like the quiet, the rhythm, the way the world narrows down to the swirl of your pestle and the smell of fermenting bark. You sit back, watch the wine darken, let the dust settle on your sleeves like an old friend, and the day begins. By mid-morning, the scriptorium has woken up. 3 scribes have taken their places at the long table across from you, already bent over fresh sheets of parchment. You don't envy them. Their work is delicate, unforgiving, and often involves tracing the same verse 7 times until the bishop decides it feels more holy. You, on the other hand, get to play with fire. Sort of. You reach for your small ceramic brazier, carefully shielded in a corner. There's a blackened pot resting above it, its bottom coated in yesterday's soot. Today's batch of carbon ink will need more. You grab a scrap of linen and toss it into the flame. It doesn't flare. It smolders, slow and steady. The smoke curls upward and hits the lid above, condensing into a fine, sticky residue. Lampblack, pure carbon, ink in the making. You scrape it gently with a flat bone tool, the same way your teacher showed you years ago. He's gone now, left for Mount Athos or maybe for silence itself. You still use his tool. It's slightly crooked and makes a faint clicking sound when you stir. You find this comforting. Here's your major fact. Carbon ink, made from soot and gum, was the go-to ink for centuries across empires. It was durable, easy to make, and water-resistant. Unless you sneezed on it during application, in which case it performed dramatic vanishing acts. The ink slowly takes shape in your bowl. A glossy, black ribbon, thick as honey. You add water. Stir clockwise. Always clockwise. Not for spiritual reasons. It's just your habit now. Like checking the latch twice on your cell door. Here's something weirder. Some monks swore by adding a drop of their own blood to ink when copying penitential texts. Not for drama. For humility. You won't be doing that today. You had porridge for breakfast. You're not in the mood. You ladle a small portion into a glazed jar and pass it to one of the scribes. He nods in thanks but doesn't look up. His eyes are fixed on a Greek phi that refuses to behave. The scriptorium creaks. The world outside continues, unheard. You can just make out the smell of baking bread wafting from the kitchen down the hill. Your stomach grumbles once, but agrees to wait. You glance down at your hands. Stained black. As usual. The ink gets into your nails, your sleeves, your thoughts. You've had dreams in monochrome, but it's a good kind of black. A quiet black. A black that listens. You return to the brazier, add more linen, and stir. And somewhere between the smoke, the silence, and the soft scratch of pen on parchment, the world grows beautifully still. You take your midday break in the cloister garden. Not because you need it necessarily, but because the ink does. It needs time to rest, to cool, to thicken into something more than just dark water. And you need sunlight, something warm and slow and alive that isn't a gallnut or a scrap of goat hide. The garden is modest. A few rows of bitter greens, a fig tree that hasn't quite decided if it wants to fruit this year, and an unbothered tortoise who seems to believe the whole monastery belongs to him. You sit on the low stone bench under the fig tree, the same one you've used for 7 years. The stone is still warm from the sun. The fig leaves cast shifting shadows across your robe, light and dark, like script. One of the younger novices is watering the herbs. He waves. You nod. Neither of you says a word. Talking is allowed technically, but no one really wants to. Not here. Words are for parchment, not air. The breeze carries the scent of time and something vaguely like mint, but definitely not mint. You've asked 3 times what it is. No one knows. The monks just call it the other green thing. Here's your major fact. Byzantine monasteries often had small gardens not just for food, but for medicinal herbs and pigment sources. Some plants were grown solely for their ability to stain. Madder root for red, woad for blue. walnut husk for brown. Everything had a second purpose. You once tried to make ink from violets. It came out pale and disappointing, like poetry written by someone afraid of verbs. The abbot suggested you stick to soot. You pluck a fig leaf, press it between your palms. Not for any reason, just the texture. Here's your obscure tidbit. Some monks used to press leaves and dried flowers between their manuscript pages, not as decoration, but as silent prayers. Over time, the plants left faint stains on the parchment, ghosts of devotion, preserved in cellulose. Scholars still debate whether this was a conscious choice or just a convenient place to dry things. You lean toward the latter. Nothing says divine intent like forgetting where you left your herbs. The bell rings softly once, twice. You sigh and rise. The ink is calling. The tortoise blinks at you, unimpressed. He does not rise. Back in the scriptorium, the light has shifted. The sun filters through the narrow slits in the stone walls, slicing the room into warm ribbons and cool shadows. The scribes have settled into a deeper kind of stillness, the kind that only comes after hours of repetition. Their pens glide, hesitate, correct, glide again, like cautious dancers with very bad knees. You return to your bench and lift the ink jar. It's cooled nicely, thickened just enough to cling to the reed, but not enough to clog it. You stir it once, clockwise always, and sniff. Smells like history. Well, history and vinegar. But still, now comes the bottling. You have a small shelf where you keep finished jars, each labeled with a piece of old parchment tied with twine. You write the dates in Greek numerals, slowly, carefully, not because you're worried about accuracy, but because the abbot once scolded you for rush threes. You label this one Delta Phi Gamma, black, soft-flowing, psalm-ready. Here's your historical detail. In some monasteries, ink was classified by usage, liturgical, instructional, decorative. The scribes had preferences. Thicker ink for headings, thinner for commentary. One particularly fussy monk insisted that the ink for revelation be stormier. You accommodate them. You have opinions, of course, but you keep them to yourself like most good monks and all great ink mixers. One of the scribes calls over without looking up. Do we have any more of the glossy kind? The one from last Epiphany. You nod. Fetch a bottle. Set it beside him. He grunts his approval. Obscure tidbit. Some scribes believed certain inks aged better over decades, and they would label their favorites not by color but by feast day. The Candlemas batch. That Ash Wednesday mix. You're fairly sure one of your jars is labeled the ink that smelled like apples. Whether that batch still exists or was just a vivid olfactory lie remains one of your small mysteries. Outside, the wind picks up. The fig leaves rattle. You settle into your stool, stir your next bowl, and think about how strange it is that the act of writing eternity begins with stirring soot. You smile, then keep stirring. Afternoon brings a certain heaviness to the monastery. Not of mood, no one here is troubled, but of air. The sun, now past its peak, lays thick and golden over the hillside. Insects hum. Dust motes drift like indecisive angels. You move slower. Everyone does. Even the ink refuses to run as easily, thickening slightly in protest. You take a cloth and wipe down the rim of a jar, humming a psalm under your breath. You're not particularly devout, but the rhythm helps. 4 syllables per stroke. like a quiet metronome made of Gregorian resolve. A novice enters the scriptorium with a stack of blank parchment. He places them down too hard and earns a stern glance from one of the senior scribes. The parchment flutters in reply. You nod politely at the boy. He nods back, then vanishes like smoke. Being young here means being silent, mostly. You return to your little shelf. Check your ink supplies. 3 jars of iron gall, 2 of lampblack, and, yes, your most recent experiment, walnut husk brown. It came out uneven and smelled faintly of damp sandals. But someone might want it. Someone always wants the strange ones. Here's your major fact. Walnut ink, while popular in later Western Europe, was sometimes used in Byzantine annotations and marginalia, especially in secular or less ornate manuscripts. It was softer, gentler, easier on the eyes, perfect for private readings. You dab a little onto scrap parchment. Watch it bloom. The monks didn't have color wheels or Pantone books. They had instinct and hours of trial. You've spent months trying to recreate a blue from a fragment of a 10th century gospel. It always dries green. Always. At this point, it feels personal. Here's your obscure tidbit. In the margins of one Greek herbal manuscript, a monk wrote a note, not about the text, but about the ink. It read, "This one fades. Do not trust it." Scholars still debate whether he meant the ink or the scribe. You sit back and stare out the window. A bird flits past. You think it's a swallow, or maybe a fig thief. The monastery cat would know, but he's busy sleeping under the abbot's chair. You consider joining him, but the ink isn't done yet, and neither are you. As the day leans into evening, the monastery begins to contract. You can feel it, the way a body curls inward toward sleep. Less movement, fewer footsteps in the halls. A stillness that spreads from the chapel outward, as if the bells themselves are exhaling. You decide it's time for varnish. It's not always needed, but for particularly fussy manuscripts or fussy scribes, you'll mix in a drop of resin to gloss the ink and help preserve it against damp. You keep your resins in small pouches, each labeled with careful ink. Pine, mastic, frankincense. The last one is rarely used and smells like a bishop's cloak after Lent. You choose mastic today. The sticky, cooperative, and vaguely smells of lemon and nostalgia. You drop a few grains into a spoonful of warm water and swirl until it dissolves. The ink, once mixed, gleams slightly, like it remembers something. Here's your major historical fact. Some Byzantine inks included varnish or oil-based resins not only for durability but also to reflect light in candlelit rooms. A small luxury, a glint of pride in otherwise humble pages. You pour the finished ink into a shallow jar, cap it, and label it, "Soft Varnish, June Sunday." Your handwriting wobbles slightly. Your hand is tired. Across the room, a scribe sneezes, loudly. The others look up, startled. One ink line jerks dramatically across a saint's foot. The scribe curses gently, monkishly, and sighs. You offer a new sheet. He waves it off. "I'll make the saint limp," he mutters. You smile. That's the 3rd limping saint this month. Here's your obscure tidbit. In a few Byzantine manuscripts, saints appear with oddly shaped legs or extra toes. Some scholars blame artistic choice. Others believe it was a way to hide ink accidents under holiness. Faith in correction. The sun dips lower. orange now and a little drunk. You close the ink jars one by one, gently pressing the wax-sealed lids down, like tucking in small children, or extremely boring secrets. You hear a bell in the distance. The final office approaches. You'll attend, of course. Then maybe sweep the scriptorium. Maybe not. You run a finger along the edge of your work table. Ink and dust. Then you extinguish the brazier and let the fire go to sleep first. The monastery by night is not silent. Contrary to what outsiders assume, those who imagine rows of monks frozen in prayer like soot sculptures, the place hums gently after dark. The wind speaks through narrow corridors. Mice hold committee under the grain stores. Old floorboards complain in ancient Greek. And then there's the drip. Always the drip. Somewhere behind the apothecary wall, water escapes from a crack no one can find. A single drop every 20 seconds. You've counted. Tonight you pass through the cloister slowly, your lamp a small circle of gold against the stone. You're not expected anywhere, but sometimes, after prayers, you check the inks. Not from worry, just habit. You slip into the scriptorium and inhale. Even in darkness, the room smells like a thoughtful forest. Resin, parchment, dust. You could live here forever and still not know what that one drawer smells like. The one that never opens. You light a second lamp, just low enough to see your shelf. The jars wait like little monks themselves. Patient, quiet, possibly judging you. You reach for the walnut ink and open it. It's changed. Slightly thicker. The color deeper, richer. Like the husk of a plum at the end of summer. You nod to yourself. A good batch. No notes. Major fact. Some Byzantine scribes would let ink rest for several days before use, believing it improved the flow and tone. Not entirely wrong, especially for plant-based inks which could ripen with air and time. You dip a reed into the mix, draw a test line on parchment. It whispers across the surface. Not too bold, not too faint. A line with self-esteem, but no need for compliments. You label it, Night Batch Trustworthy. Your obscure tidbit. In the margins of one surviving manuscript, a monk once scribbled, "This ink was made under a full moon." It writes clearer. Scholars still debate whether lunar influence was superstition or simply atmospheric humidity. You leave the jar open for just a moment longer, letting the night breathe into it. Then you cap it and extinguish your lamp. Back through the corridor, past the dripping crack, you return to your cell. Not to sleep yet. Not quite. You sit by your tiny window, watching stars arrange themselves in constellations you keep forgetting the names of. Above, the moon is not quite full. Below, your ink is better than yesterday. And that's enough. Morning again. A new bowl to stir. Today you're working with lampblack, your oldest friend. The soot of burned olive oil, gathered with glass funnels and mixed with wine vinegar until it weeps into the world's blackest paste. It stains everything. Your fingers, your robe cuffs, one time your eyebrow. For 3 days the abbot thought you were scowling at him. You smile at the memory, then promptly sneeze. Lampblack dust still tickles the nose no matter how many years you've handled it. This batch is for a gospel heading. They want something bold, something proud. Not decorative, but serious. You reach for the bronze mortar and begin grinding. Here's your historical fact. Lampblack was one of the most widely used pigments in Byzantine ink, especially for outlines, calligraphy, and canonical scripture. Its purity made it ideal for spiritual texts, free from the vagaries of plant decay. It also lasts. Some of your own test parchments, buried in the back of a shelf, look exactly the same after a decade. Others not so much. The beet juice experiment, for instance, has faded into something you can only call emotional pink. Obscure tidbit. Some monks tried using charred bread for emergency soot when oil was scarce. It worked barely, but the resulting ink smelled faintly like panic and lentils. You stir slowly, clockwise with a little flourish. You're alone in the room and allow yourself a small whistle. A bad habit. The abbot once called it unmonastic cheer. You didn't argue, but you kept whistling. You pour a little water into the soot paste, then a touch of gum arabic. Not too much. Thickens faster than guilt. After 20 careful minutes, the ink reaches that perfect consistency. Something between syrup and prophecy. You draw a line on fresh parchment. It holds. You draw another. It sings. You lean back, fold your arms, and let yourself enjoy it. The sun peeks through the high slit in the wall, warming your knees. You close your eyes just for a second. A moment of ink-scented peace, and the joy of black that stays. Lunch is finished. You had lentils again. There was also bread, faintly burnt on the bottom, and a slice of something greenish that was once confidently called cheese. You washed it all down with water that tasted of distant brass bells. Delicious in a monastic way. Now, sated and slightly sleepy, you return to the scriptorium, where you are greeted not by monks but by a mess. Someone, probably a novice, has knocked over one of your jars. Not your best ink, thankfully. Just the iron gall batch from 2 weeks ago. But the spill is dramatic. A long smear like a lizard tail, curling across the table and halfway down the leg. You stare at it. It stares back. Well, you mutter. I suppose St. Basil's commentaries didn't need that corner. No one responds, which is good. You don't really want witnesses when you mop ink off ancient wood with a rag made from someone's old robe. Here's your major historical fact. Iron gall ink was corrosive. Over time, it could eat through parchment and damage manuscripts. A bittersweet irony for something once prized for permanence. Some scribes thinned it to reduce damage. Others just crossed their fingers. You clean silently, thinking about all the pages you've helped fill. Some bright and precise, others chaotic and hurried. You remember a psalter where the margins were littered with tiny fish. No one ever explained why. Here's your obscure tidbit. In at least one Byzantine manuscript, a bored scribe drew a battle between 2 ants, complete with armor and spears. Scholars still debate whether it was metaphor or lunch-induced madness. You finish scrubbing. The stain has left a faint gray shadow, like an old promise. You place a small inkwell over it, nonchalantly. There. No one will notice unless they're very nosy. Or a saint. You glance toward the high shelves, where unfinished scrolls wait to be bound. You whisper, "None of you saw anything, just in case." It's late afternoon, and you're out of gum arabic. A quiet crisis. Without that sap, harvested from distant acacia trees, you might as well dip your pens in soup. The ink will run, bleed, fade like gossip by morning. You need structure, a spine for your pigment, so you leave the walls. The monastery garden is modest but dignified. A fig tree leans like a gossipy ant over the herb beds. A few bees are lingering around the fennel, unwilling to accept that the season is winding down. You don't grow acacia here, but Brother Maximos keeps a stash in the apothecary, and you know how to bribe him. Bring 2 apples from the northern tree, the ones that taste faintly of honey and disappointment. You pick them carefully, dodging a nest of something that may or may not be wasps. Nature, you remind yourself, is still part of the divine plan. Even the stinging bits. In the apothecary, Maximos takes the apples, sniffs them suspiciously, then hands you a small pouch. "You owe me," he says. "I owe you exactly 2 apples," you reply. He nods. "Fair. Here's your major fact. Gum arabic was essential in medieval inks. It bound pigment particles together and allowed the ink to adhere properly to parchment. Without it, colors could flake off or smear with the slightest touch. Back at your work table, you open the pouch. The resin is golden and crumbles beautifully. You soak it in water warmed by the late sun and stir gently until it thickens. The smell is faintly floral. You always forget that. Obscure tidbit. In one early Byzantine recipe, gum arabic was replaced with snail slime in emergencies. Apparently it worked, but the pages glistened unnaturally, and no one was ever quite comfortable turning them. You test your new mixture. It works like a charm. Smooth, cohesive, grateful. You label the jar, with apology to the apples. You sit back and let the late sun touch your face. For a moment, you are not a monk, not an ink mixer, not a custodian of vanishing knowledge. You are simply someone who made something useful, and that's more than enough. The abbot wants a title page. You were warned at breakfast, in that ominous way monks deliver casual news. A single raised eyebrow, a gentle cough, and the words, "He's asking for you." Now you're standing in his study, where scrolls line the walls like quiet witnesses. He sits with his fingers steepled, gazing at you like you've just confessed to adding too much gum arabic again. "I need a title for the Gospel of Luke," he says. "Something clean, graceful, readable by candlelight, ideally before Advent." You nod. "Any color preference?" "Black, of course. Always black. Saints may wear gold, martyrs may wear red, but titles, those must behave." You leave with a thin stack of parchment, the instructions tucked into your sleeve like a reluctant bird. You already know the layout you'll use: double columns, half-inch margins, small decorative vine work around the first capital. The vines are always slightly asymmetrical. You like them that way, like they're still growing. Here's your historical fact. Byzantine manuscripts often featured headpieces and decorative initials, combining geometric patterns, flora, and Christian symbols. These embellishments weren't just pretty. They served as visual resting points for the reader, anchors for the soul, so to speak. Back at your desk, you begin the layout. First, you gently score the parchment with a stylus to guide your lines. Then, using your best brush, one made from the hair of a goat who, rumor has it, once chewed through a hymnal, you begin outlining the vines. Obscure tidbit. Some scribes used ashes from burned scripture fragments to bless their inks before titling sacred texts. A mix of reverence, recycling, and possibly superstition. Scholars still debate whether this made the ink holier or just harder to explain. You steady your hand. The first stroke lands. Crisp, confident. You breathe out. Outside, the bell rings for Vespers. You ignore it. The title has begun. And in this moment, no one in the empire matters but you and this line. The next morning your arm hurts. Just a little. A dull throb near the shoulder. One of those ink mixer pains that doesn't show up until you reach for bread and nearly drop the plate. You rotate it a few times, flex your fingers. It'll pass. You return to your station, find the title work untouched, pristine. It feels like someone else's hand did this. Someone more precise, more rested. You nod to yourself, like a thief admiring their own forgery. Today's job is delicate, gold leaf. Not much, just a sliver for the first letter. A gilded K for Katalukan. According to Luke, it's tradition. Not that gilding is easy. You must breathe slower, move softer, think thinner. You pull out the gesso, your glue. A creamy paste made of chalk, fish glue, and, well, mystery. You apply it carefully to the base of the letter, then wait until it's just tacky enough. Time to place the gold. You peel a square from the stack. It flutters in your breath like it's deciding whether to stay with you or float off to Constantinople. You hold it with a dry brush, barely breathing, and press it gently into the curve of the letter. There. You exhale. You smooth it with agate. It shines like stolen light. Here's your major fact. Gold leaf was used in illuminated manuscripts not just for beauty, but to reflect literal light onto sacred text during candlelit readings. It created a sense of the divine breaking through the page, a shimmer of the eternal. And here's your obscure tidbit. Some scribes whispered a prayer or recited psalm lines when laying gold, not for precision, but so their breath wouldn't disturb the leaf. Scholars still debate whether this made the work holier or just quieter. You finish the K, then sit back. Your reflection swims faintly in the gilding. A golden letter, a small miracle. You close the brush jar with a sigh, rub your shoulder again, and whisper, "You're not young anymore, but the page is, and that's enough." Rain today. Not dramatic, not a storm. Just a long, soft drizzle that clings to the stone windows like a sleepy cat. It taps against the sill, slow and metronomic, as if politely reminding you to lower your voice. Not that you talk much. You're mostly alone in the scriptorium these days. You light a lamp anyway. The grayness dims everything, and the letters need light. You're working on corrections. Today's passage, a muddled bit of Acts, where the scribe got creative with spelling and turned Peter into something that looks suspiciously like Potter, probably a slip of the reed, or a nod to someone's favorite jug. You hold the page up to the light and squint. Nope, definitely Potter. Time for your scraping knife, the most elegant eraser you'll ever own. You wet the parchment slightly, then gently scrape the ink away in short, practiced flicks. The scent of old parchment rises, dry, earthy, and oddly sweet. Here's your major historical fact. Byzantine scribes routinely scraped parchment to correct mistakes, though overuse could weaken the surface. Expert corrections were nearly invisible. Novices left ghost words behind, like the memory of a sneeze. You apply fresh ink to the patch, restoring Peter to his rightful place. He looks grateful. You imagine him nodding in approval, soggy beard and all. Here's your obscure tidbit. Some monks, perhaps joking, perhaps not, believed mistakes in scripture invited minor demons to roost in the margins. A clean copy, therefore, wasn't just tidy, it was protective. Scholars still debate whether this belief was metaphorical or the result of too many long nights. You close the volume and move it to the drying rack. The rain continues. You pour a cup of warmed wine, thin and herbal, and sip it while watching droplets race each other down the glass. Your shoulder doesn't hurt today. Maybe it likes the rain too. Evening now. The last of the day curls in like smoke. The scriptorium is nearly dark, but for your lamp, a small golden globe of calm. The others have gone to Compline. You're not far behind, but you want to finish one last thing, the colophon. It's the final mark on the manuscript. Not just the end, but the quiet sigh of the person who spent months or years bringing it into being. You open to the last page and stare at the space beneath the text. What to write? You're not supposed to include your name. It's not about you. But sometimes scribes slip things in. Prayers, small jokes, a complaint about the weather. Your predecessor once wrote, "May whoever reads this remember me, unless they are a heretic." Charming. Here's your historical fact. Colophons in Byzantine manuscripts often included poetic notes or blessings, revealing rare glimpses of the scribe's personality. Fatigue, humor, reverence, or the occasional shade thrown at their pen. You tap your stylus against your lip. Then you begin. Written by a quiet hand in the shadow of rain. If the letters are crooked, blame the wind. If they are straight, give thanks to God. You add a tiny inkpot symbol in the corner. Personal, but not proud. Here's your obscure tidbit. In one 10th century gospel, a scribe added, "I was cold, my fingers were numb, and the ink froze twice." Kyrie eleison. Scholars still debate whether it was exaggeration or just Cappadocia in January. You close the manuscript, softly, like tucking in a child. Your lamp flickers. You take the hint. As you step outside, the stars are just beginning to declare themselves. The night smells of wet stone and rosemary. You bow your head, not in prayer, just in gratitude. It's been a quiet day.
No spills.
No scrolls dropped. No monks accusing you of hoarding the nicer brushes. You are, of course, but still manners. You're sorting pigments now. Your small kingdom of color, neatly sealed in oyster shells, walnut halves, or, when you're feeling extravagant, tiny ceramic dishes. There's azurite, the color of deep lake water, and red ochre from the hills behind the monastery. Even a pinch of lapis from far-off Badakhshan, locked in a jar like it might fly away if you open it too quickly. The light is soft. Golden hour, if Byzantium ever called it that. You probably wouldn't paint in this glow. It lies too kindly. But it's good for remembering. Here's your historical fact. Some of the pigments used in Byzantine manuscripts were more expensive than gold by weight, especially ultramarine. Reserved for the most sacred or imperial commissions, it traveled overland through Persia, across deserts, on the backs of traders who knew its worth better than its chemistry. You swirl a tiny bit of green earth between your fingers. It smells faintly of moss and copper. You wonder who else touched it before it got here. A trader, a miner, a mule driver cursing at a mountain. Strange to think your brush is the last stop in that journey. You make a mental note to reorder the malachite, and maybe clean the yellow shelf. It's been looking a bit turmeric forward. Here's your obscure tidbit. Some monks believed that green pigment, if not blessed, could attract frogs. Real frogs. Into the monastery. Scholars still debate whether this warning came from botanical confusion or an especially damp spring in Thessaly. You finish your inventory. All pigments accounted for. All jars sealed. No frogs. You roll your shoulders, brush a fleck of dust off your robe, and let yourself sit still. No ink today, just a quiet color, and the faint hum of something eternal. Now the lamps are dim. The scriptorium has fallen into hush, the kind of hush that isn't empty, but full of softened things. Dust motes drift through the air, slow as thoughts not yet spoken. Somewhere, a quill rests on its side like it, too, is waiting for sleep. You sit by the window, wrapped in your robe, fingers stained with histories. The wind rustles a vine just outside, the leaves tapping gently against the stone like an old monk politely asking to come in. The air smells of wax and parchment and rain-dried linen. Familiar, ancient, comfortable. You lean back, your shoulders ease downward. You've done enough for today, more than enough. A gilded letter, a cleaned-up apostle, a batch of ink that smells like summer resin. The manuscript is closed. Your tools are laid out in neat little lines like well-fed thoughts, and the night stretches long ahead of you, velvet and deep. You hear the slow, steady rhythm of monastery bells far off, Compline, maybe, or just the wind pretending to be holy. A candle gutters out, another flickers low. You breathe in, the ink beneath your nails, the weight of a finished page, the slow turning of centuries under your fingers. None of it asks anything more from you now. It all simply rests, like you will, like you are. So close your eyes. Let the library slip away. Let the gold leaf fade into dream. Let the quiet life of a Byzantine ink mixer carry you gently, softly, slowly, into sleep. Good night.